Thank you all so much. My name is Jordan Richardson. I'm a senior policy counselor with Americans for Prosperity. And our panel today is on second chances. And at Americans for Prosperity, we care about criminal justice reform and second chances for about primarily three reasons. The first issue is about public safety. You know, when we think about our communities, we want to make sure that our communities are safe. That is the most important thing we can do in our criminal justice system. You know, a few years ago, the Charles Koch Institute did a poll between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton voters. And the most common thread among them was that when they were asked about the criminal justice system, they said 87% of them said the number one purpose for our criminal justice system is to keep the public safe. That came above deterrence or even punishment itself. But the other reason we care about criminal justice reform is about cost. If you look at your state budget, criminal justice reform and corrections spending is usually the second or third line item budget right after education and healthcare. But for us, it's also about a more important issue, human dignity. The idea that each of us are better than our worst day and that we all deserve a second chance at redemption. And that's what we're here to talk about is second chances. What happens to someone after they've come into prison, they're coming back into our community. Today I have with me Gene Barr. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. He has over 40 years of experience in business and government and politics. And he was recently named the most effective association lobbyist in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He's got a wealth of experience to help us talk about these issues, to think through how we can make sure that our communities are safe, that we lower costs, but more importantly, we're upholding the idea of human dignity. So Gene, maybe you could start us off and talk about, when you're in your position at the Chamber, how do you approach the issue of criminal justice reform? Because it's not something that I think a lot of people would think that the Chamber would be interested in at all. Why is that the case?
Oh, completely agree. And Jordan, first, let me thank the Koch group for what they've done, and groups like Koch and the Americans for Prosperity, which have been involved in this issue. For those of you who talk to folks who believe that the people at Koch are the devil incarnate from the conservative side, I love responding to people and say, oh, you mean the people who've given millions to scholarships for disadvantaged children? You mean the people who are on the cutting edge of doing criminal justice reform? You mean those Koch brothers? Yeah. So it's always fun to push back on that. And so, yeah, we get that a lot about, well, why is this a business issue? And it is, as you note, it's a human dignity issue first. And let's state at the very beginning so there's no question whatsoever about this. This is not, gee, let's just turn the prisons loose. There are people in prison who should be there, and to be blunt, who should never get out, certain people. There's no question about that. And as you talked about what people view as the role of government, we talk a lot about in our work about what government's role should be, and protecting the public safety ranks near the top. No question about it. That is one of the things that we have government for. So why is business involved beyond those questions of human dignity? Well, the reality is that this year, as every year typically, 700,000 men and women will be released into the community from incarceration. So what do we do about that? Do we simply hope and trust that they will go back and become productive members of society, or do we have to do something a little more active about making sure that happens? And also think about the fact about what this costs. $40,000 to $50,000 a year to keep somebody in prison, which is the cost roughly, having paid it, of 2 kids to go to a state system school here in Pennsylvania. So why does the business community care? One of the things that, as we look at this, we have a workforce shortage in this Commonwealth. And I was recently asked by the governor to serve as one of the co-chairs of his workforce development command center. And one of the things that when you look at Pennsylvania and many other states demographically, we have a real shortage of people. We have people without jobs, we have jobs without people. And so we have a lot of work to do, in our view, to expand that base, to make more people eligible to work. And part of that expansion of the base, in our view, involves making sure that the men and women who have served our country and protected our country, when they leave the military and come into the private sector, that we make sure we engage them and get them productive jobs. People who have some type of mental or physical disability, to the extent we can integrate them into the workforce, we make sure that we do that. And again, to the people who want to come out and have a second chance at their lives, we want to make sure that when they come out, we do what we can to, of course, bring them in as well. All of us believe in this room, I think, fundamentally in the dignity of work. if we believe in the dignity of work and getting those people back to work, and what we heard from a lot of the speakers here is that fundamental sense of dignity here over the last day and a half, we certainly believe in that as well. We need more workers. We need to eliminate the barriers to work that we find in this country, as your group has done and has worked on. And so we would like to take a much closer look at that and figure out how we do that in a reasonable, responsible manner. Again, making sure that we're protecting the public, but also moving forward to expand the base of people who are available to take those jobs.
Well, when you mentioned the workforce shortage, the thing I was wondering was, you could probably recruit from a lot of different parts of society. You could talk to college kids, you could talk to, all sorts of people. Why focus on people who have criminal records? Is there a unique value that population has that would benefit businesses?
Well, I'd say two answers to that. One is, just demographically, we're kind of running out of people. When I've talked to people over the years, our members, it's now the #1 issue for our organization, because I've talked to our members for years, and I'll say to them, what's your biggest problem keeping you up at night? And last year, for the first time, our survey showed it's workforce. For years, it was healthcare or taxes or the general economy. And when I ask them, I say, do you mean you can't find the skills you need? You can't find people to show up to work? They say, can't find the skills, can't find them to show up to work on time, can't find them to show up to work at all, can't find them to pass a drug test. And so we're really running out of people. But the second part of that is, when you talk about people who are coming out and who are genuinely concerned about putting their lives back together, as you note, who wants to be known forever for the worst thing you've ever done in your life? And people want to come out and begin to protect, to take care of themselves and their family. We should do what we can to assist that. And when I talk to my members who have made a point of hiring people who have come out of the criminal justice system, it's interesting. Many of them will tell you they are the best employees they've had. They have seen life on the other side, and they don't like it. I'm not saying every single one, because I made it clear at the outset there are certain people who should not be out of prison. But they will tell you they're the best employees they have. They've seen the other side. They know they don't want to be part of that anymore. There's a tremendous sense of loyalty that they've said, hey, you gave me a chance, and I'm going to respond by being the best darn employee that I can. And finally, and this is a little bit delicate, some of them have said, hey, you know what? Some of the folks were running, let's be blunt, criminal enterprises. So some of the business experiences they brought out of those enterprises actually are helpful when you're brought into a legitimate business enterprise.
You knew about supply chain management. The problem was your product was illegal.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. So yeah.
So when you're thinking about the value for the business, what are some of the hurdles that an employer might face if they're wanting to hire someone as a criminal record? Because I can imagine, if you hadn't thought about this, a whole lot, if it's for the first time you're thinking about it, you might be wondering, is there going to be a risk if I hire someone with a criminal record? What's your response to that?
Absolutely. And look, there are certain things. If you're hiring at a bank, you probably don't want to get somebody who's been convicted of embezzlement. Right? Let's leave that out there. Probably not a good idea. If you've got somebody who, for example, has been incarcerated for assault or aggravated assault, what are the problems? What happens if you go in and they strike one of your customers or another employee? So one of the things that we've worked together, all of our groups on, and have worked with legislators, et cetera, is safe harbor, some type of safe harbor protection. If a business goes out and hires just to give this person a shot, and they do it in good faith, that there should be some protection. Because let's be honest, Pennsylvania's criminal justice system has harmed all of us. We're also part of a criminal justice reform effort in this Commonwealth, because all too often businesses face, I would say, frivolous lawsuits, so we want to make sure that we protect them from that. And there's an understanding within the legislature, and actually in even this administration, that we need to give businesses those protections to make sure that they're covered when they take that chance and go out and hire somebody who's looking for that second chance.
Yeah. Now, so we've talked about the value to the employers. You're going to get someone who is really trying to have a second chance, really working extra hard to be able to make it in this new type of job. Let's talk about what other barriers a person who's coming out of prison might face. It's hard enough to get a job, to get an interview, but are there other barriers that the government sets in place that make it harder for people to actually get a job, like getting a license to begin with? How does that affect our population as it pertains to public safety and recidivism?
Yeah, great question. And there are a couple things. First off, we heard Congressman Perry here today talk about what we know will set you up for success. that is making sure you get your education, making sure you don't have children to a certain age, et cetera. So a lot of them haven't done that, let's be honest. So there has to be that effort to try and bring them up because of that base is not there for the success we'd like to have them so they can move into being productive. But you are absolutely dead on in terms of licensing. We know that licensing costs consumers, that is, hey, you have to have this level up here when it arguably you can look at it and say, well, you shouldn't have to do that, in all honesty, to be licensed. Costs consumers about $203 billion a year, all of you in this room and the people watching, for the licensing side. So we have to look at what are the legitimate barriers for licensing. Someone who goes all through this, they want to do this, and there's moral turpitude clauses in certain things. Say, oh, if you have a criminal record, you can't do this. They're knocked out. They are good people. They want a second chance. They have the talent, skills, and abilities to do it. They have the drive to do it, but because of a licensing requirement that really has very little, if anything, to do with the job, they're knocked out. So our job, our groups, ours and yours and others, are working on what do we really need to set up as part of a licensing, and what do we really need to start to take down, to dismantle. Because one of the things that we find in our organization as we look at certain legislative issues that are introduced is many times the people in those organizations or in those occupations try and erect those barriers to keep competition out. We have to really focus on what is necessary for public protection, consumer protection, and what isn't, and work to figure out how to right-size those.
So it sounds to me like when we're talking about occupational licensing, it can easily be portrayed as an issue about criminal justice, but it's also an issue about free markets.
Absolutely.
This is about free enterprise and making sure that the most qualified people are allowed to get a job without going through unnecessary hurdles. As you're thinking about other things out there that might be hard for someone to get a job, one of the things that most commonly comes up is the issue of when someone wants to apply for a job, there's a question on the job application asking if they've had a criminal record. Correct. There's a movement in this country to ban the box, and I know there's some different opinions about the effectiveness of this. What does your organization think about that? Are there upsides or downsides to that?
Well, there's a couple pieces of that. First off, last year Pennsylvania passed something called clean slate legislation, which in our view was critically important. We were the first state to do it. And we worked again with groups on both the left and the right. It's something I know you guys supported as well in terms of the clean slate, and I think it's going to be taken into many other states as well. That says after a certain period of time and your record has been clear, your record is basically blocked from the employer. You can go in and say, hey, I don't have that record, because they don't have access to it. Again, they may have made a mistake when they were 18 years old and now they're 31. They shouldn't have to carry that burden for the rest of their lives if they've been productive in the interim. In terms of the ban the box, that one can be a little tougher, because if they don't fall within the clean slate period, the expungement or the blocking period, that could be a little bit problematic, because one of the things that businesses see is if you ban the box at the outset and you do have a problem, say you're a bank, and this person was convicted of embezzlement, and they don't have to tell you at the outset. You go through all the process, you go through 3 interviews, all of a sudden you do the criminal background check. Oh, wow, they were bank president and they were convicted of embezzlement. Yeah. So it's one of the things that we're still working through. At what point can you ask that question? I think clean slate was a great way of addressing part of that. I think there's still more discussions about how we interact with folks on that basis.
Very good. Well, I want to take this opportunity to point out a report. This is called Workers with Criminal Records. It's a survey that was done by the Charles Koch Institute and the Society for Human Resource Management. And you can find this outside in the exhibition hall under the Charles Koch Institute table. And what this report did, if you're an employer here, if you work for an employer that is interested in second chance hiring, this will give you a step-by-step toolkit to learn about. This will give you information about the struggle that people in the business community have, but also there's another portion of this called getting talent back to work. And that's an important toolkit as an employer to tell you, if you're worried about this aspect of hiring someone, here's the legal toolkit that you need to be able to bring some of these people on so you can have qualified workers. It also gives you examples about how to do the hiring process, what to be on the lookout for. But I think as Gene mentioned, when it comes to our workforce, if you have a shortage and you need qualified people, it doesn't make any sense just to tell an entire population right at the very outset that you can't even come in the door.
We're not taking you.
They're not taking you. So shifting to we've talked a lot about business. We've talked about people who actually have a criminal record. Let's take a moment and talk about what is the value to society. If employers are hiring people with criminal records, you might be able to say that's a transaction between 2 individuals. How does that affect me? What is your response to other people who say, I'm not in business, it's not my job to hire someone with a criminal record? What's in it? Why should I be supportive of this at all?
Well, I think there's a couple. One is it's just for someone who wants to take that second start, it's just a fair and fundamental piece of decency to do for somebody. As you noted, hey, we shouldn't forever be tarred by one incident that we did that wasn't murder or something like that. Second, as we noted, there's a tremendous cost to keep people who are incarcerated. But finally, as I said, we're having incredible work. If we can't find the people to fill these jobs, whatever those jobs are, from some of the most technical to some that aren't, we're not going to be able to grow this economy. We're not going to be able to continue the prosperity we've seen in the last few years. That will not continue, and we will stagnate. If we can't find the people that we need to put into those positions, if we can't bring them in, if we can't take advantage of the talents of the broadest array of our population. I mentioned as part of this workforce effort, we're looking at vets, at the disabled, at those with criminal justice records. If we don't figure out how to take the utmost advantage of all those, then we are not going to be able to continue this prosperity as a country. We really just will not be able to do it.
So we've talked about, this makes good sense from a criminal justice perspective. It makes great sense from a free market perspective. It also makes good sense just as a community perspective. How do we build and grow our communities and keep them safe? One of the things I'm most fascinated by about second chance hiring is that what you were mentioning is that in a lot of these businesses, they're the best employees that these employers have had. And that has another trickle-down effect too, which is if you are steady, earning a job, providing for your family, that means you're not out in the street committing a new crime.
Absolutely.
And so this is also a measure about keeping the public safe, which should be our #1 concern as well.
Absolutely. And it's also a piece, because I'll be honest, part of the concern we had getting involved in this was we did not want this to be seen as anti-law enforcement. And as you think about it, and I've talked to folks on the law enforcement side, and one of the people involved in this, Representative Delosier here, her husband is a law enforcement officer. Sure. This is not in fact, as you note, if we can bring these people out, if we can get them a job, we make it much more likely that they will stay on the straight and narrow, that they'll not get engaged in criminal activity, they won't pose a threat to law enforcement, we're not going to have to reincarcerate them. Because look, we've tried a whole bunch of things and it appears not to have touched recidivism. Our view is getting people the job, getting them on a path that will allow them to get into the middle class is exactly what we want to do. The other thing that we're all working on right now that our organizations, again, that kind of the next thing is looking at probation and parole reform. And the previous panel had some great thoughts on how you use stories. And I'll be honest, I've seen some very compelling stories. One of the stories I saw was about a young man who had come out of prison, was now working, and his probation, of course, probation set up certain dictates. He was convicted of an illegal U-turn, or he was cited for an illegal U-turn, voided his probation, and he couldn't make work on Monday. So again, to go back to the perspective of an employer, you've got your best employee who calls you up on a Monday morning and says, I'm sorry, I'm back in prison. What happened? I made a U-turn. Well, that's stupid. How could that, what difference does that make? But that unfortunately is all too often the case. We have cases where your employee is set, who works 8 to 5, but his probation meeting is 9:30 every Monday, and
Sure.
We can't change this. So we've got to look at how we make sure we integrate these people, because as I said, look, some of them are not nice people. Some of them are some of them are going back in, unfortunately, despite our best efforts, but some of them legitimately want to rebuild their lives. So it's a matter of whether it's licensing, probation and parole changes to where we can really reduce those hurdles and again, give them what we all believe is critically important, that dignity of work.
And you mentioned that a lot of people are going to be looking for work. I think the number is about 95%, and that translates to around 650,000 people every year are going to be released from prison. If you never enacted it, President Trump was famous for signing the First Step Act this year, which was an incredible step forward in criminal justice. But if you never did a single other sentencing reform or you never did anything else to the criminal justice system, we would still be having people come out in our communities because they're going to be finishing their sentences. 650,000, 95% of people are coming back. So you have to ask ourselves, we're in a unique position here because if you care about the free market, if you care about individual liberty and allowing businesses to thrive, if you want to be this positive change that you see, you don't have to wait for the government to do anything. This is something that you could take on right now. So a lot of it is not about changing laws, it's about changing hearts and minds.
Absolutely.
So Gene, I'm going to give you the last word. And what is your challenge to people who have been thinking about this and are considering how could they apply it for their business and their community?
Go out and talk to some folks who have talked to us. There's lots of great stories about people who have turned this around. We're continuing to work at how we reduce these hurdles. Some of the really exciting things out there that are happening that I love because of my position, prison entrepreneur programs that literally, hopefully turn prisons around from places where we teach people how to stay in the life of crime to how we teach them to come out and work in the free market system. But for all of you who are business people, there are great people out there. We're going to work to make sure you have the protections through safe harbor provisions and whatever else you think you need to do that. We're going to continue to work to make sure we take the utmost advantage of every person in our society who wants to work, who wants to be productive, who wants to take care of themselves and their family. Those are fundamental conservative principles.
I think that's exceptionally said. Well, thank you so much, Gene, and I appreciate the conversation today.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great job. Thanks.